Okay, people, let's do this again. This is take two. Take one didn't go so well as my internet crapped out on me. But what I'm doing now is I am recording it as opposed to doing it live. This is not a live. I will post it as a live. But this is, in fact, Memorex. Some of you will not get that reference. That's from an old commercial. But anyway, let's put that aside. Day after Memorial Day weekend. Hope it was all that you expected. We put a lot into this weekend, don't we? It is the official or unofficial start of summer. It is the functional start of summer, and hopefully everyone took a minute to just appreciate what it's about. You know, there's a line in the movie A Few Good Men, and it goes something like, they live under, or you live under, the umbrella of protection that I provide. And we do, in fact, live under the umbrella of protection that our military forces have provided. This is a nation of laws. This is a nation of ideas. But those laws and ideas have to be protected somehow. Unfortunately, due to the level of consciousness that the world is at. So our military has been doing that for years, and many members of our military have sacrificed everything in order to protect those principles and us and how we're able to live with freedom and rights that are protected. So, thanks to them. And by the way, I do have a client who is a Gold Star mom. So she has sacrificed a lot. Her son sacrificed his life, and obviously, by extension, that was a sacrifice for her. So enough about that. Let's talk about someone else who may not have sacrificed anything. I want to tell the story of my friend Crazy Tony. Crazy Tony was a college friend of mine, and back in college, I probably would not have referred to him as Crazy Tony. I probably would have called him Fun Tony. I probably would have called him Wingman Tony. I was blessed to have known him when I was in undergrad. He was that kind of personality that was fantastic to go out with. Terrific wingman. He would talk to anybody. He was fun as can be. I mean, we just had great times together. I cannot and will not get into the particulars about those great times. We are talking about college, and what happens in college stays in college, hopefully. But he's one of those guys that I reconnected with through Facebook. And this happened in 2019, I believe in the summer of 2019. He and I reconnected, and we did it in an unusual way because he's not on Facebook. He doesn't own a cell phone. We'll talk about that later. But the way we reconnected was he is a gambler. He's sort of a degenerate gambler. And he found out that online gambling could be done in New Jersey, but you have to go somewhere. I didn't get the whole story, but he had a friend reach out to me to see if I was willing to go to Freehold Raceway and place a bet or something. It was very bizarre and convoluted, very Tony. So as a result of his friend reaching out to me, I ended up reaching out to Tony. We reconnected, as people do on Facebook, because remember the nature of Facebook. You can't get rid of people. You keep running into the same people over and over, whether you want to or not. Obviously, you can block them. But it feels like with Facebook, sometimes, they just people keep reappearing. So this is what happened. And I've had this happen several times over the years. I have been able to reconnect with people who I hadn't spoken to in many, many years. With Tony, it was over 30 years. I hate to admit that, but that's the fact. Now, my experience, unfortunately, and tell me if you've experienced this too, those of you who have reconnected with people after many years, as a result of the gift that is Facebook is that people don't necessarily get better. It seems like their worst qualities are kind of get reinforced over the years. They petrify, they turn into concrete, right? That's been my experience, like I said, unfortunately, with my Facebook reconnections. And that was indeed the case with Tony. Because although he was always fun, I didn't consider him crazy back in the day. And having reconnected with him, I considered him crazy. And most people would. Now, by the way, just a little caveat here. I don't want to give anyone the impression that I am making fun of people who are actually insane, who have severe psychological, psychiatric problems, which I believe is the case with Tony, right? Most of us don't know where that line is, what that threshold is when it's an actual problem. But we do know what we experience. We do know when we experience craziness. So this was Tony. It turned out once we started speaking again that, he was very upfront about some of his problems. He had been diagnosed, for example, with OCD. And he had trouble with life as a result of that. But the interesting thing is that it wasn't a difference with him of kind. He didn't transform. He was, the qualities that I loved about him back in the day were still there, but they were amped up, right? They had multiplied exponentially. Now, what were these qualities? Well, Tony had this ability to just be able to talk and talk, and he didn't stop. And it made him arguably brilliant, very entertaining, sometimes interesting, very fun, very extroverted. And that's why he was so great to party with. That's why he and I would hit the bars and have a good time consistently. But now it had kind of turned against him because it had multiplied to such a degree. And he was very open and honest about it. And, and although I'm sort of making fun of him now, I certainly didn't when we were speaking. I commiserated, I empathized. Most people would, I would hope. But it was difficult speaking to him. And it was difficult speaking to him because of these qualities that have multiplied. He spoke nonstop. He barely breathed. There was no chance for me to get in a word edgewise. It could be very frustrating. It could be infuriating. He would just go on and on and on. And it was difficult. And ultimately, I just stopped speaking to him. I had to. There was it wasn't a conversation anyway that we were having. It was him doing a routine. And at first, that's energizing and exciting with someone like him. But then afterwards, it's just maddening. I didn't tell him that we need to stop speaking to each other. I don't know how to break up with a friend. I just stopped, and I did it as a matter of survival. Now, again, as I mentioned before, Tony is not on social media. He does not have a cell phone. This is part of the oddness that is Tony. So when I'm speaking now, I speak with no fear. First of all, I'm giving only a first name and no location. But I speak with no fear of anyone who I'm speaking to, knowing him or looking him up. And nor am I concerned about him finding out because of these things. When I cut him out, and again, I'm not sure I did the right thing the way I did it. But when I stopped communicating with him, it wasn't difficult. I heard through the grapevine, through a mutual friend, that he was very upset with me for doing that. But it wasn't difficult to do because he had no way of contacting me with no cell phone. If he would call me and I didn't answer, there was no other way without him being on social media or having the internet. He didn't have the internet at his home. So this is the character that we're dealing with. And I'll give you an example, one of the examples, and then we'll go into talking about how this is relevant. But he told me he wrote a screenplay. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. I mean, I had attempted to write a screenplay years ago myself, so I knew a little bit about it. I knew a little bit about the process and the structure of it, how it works. So I started asking him about it. And it turns out that his screenplay had a phenomenal hook. It had a great initial story. I mean, that anyone who would just hear the story about would be interested in. But here's the thing. What I learned about screenplay writing was there's a general rule, which is that approximately 1 page of a screenplay equals a minute of screen time. There's some leeway with that, but it's an approximation. And so when people write screenplays, they generally do it between 90 and 120 pages. There are some that are obviously longer. There are some movies that are longer. You look at something like Mission Impossible, the one that's out right now, and the previous one, like I think their run times were close to 3 hours. So they obviously would have been longer. But here's the thing with Tony. He tells me this story. I'm all excited. And then he tells me that it's 450 pages. Now, that equates to approximately 450 minutes. An hour is 60 minutes. 60 into 45 is almost 8 hours. And the dude couldn't help himself from just that constant kind of an outflow. Right? He couldn't rein himself in. This is the tragedy that is him. And I think we all know people like that. And to some degree, we all are people like that. We can't control our own minds. We can't control our own thoughts. Again, it's a matter of degree, isn't it? Some people, it's very obvious. We can see it in them because they just can't stop. It's like there's some mechanism in their minds that's constantly generating. And most of us think too much and whatever, and most of us generate a lot of information. But we have the ability to kind of pick and choose. And we have kind of a filter. But some people can't. On a similar note, I remember years ago when I was in chiropractic school, I was in clinic. And this very nice man came in and, and I did his intake and I did his exam. And this was a guy like that. He just could not stop himself from talking. And I remember at the time thinking, you know what? If I had like a lot of time, it might just be a fun exercise to see how long this would go on for. Because I think it would have taken like 10 hours. I really believe that. As it is, I think it took 3 hours. I mean, for an intake, an exam, and all of that. Very nice man. He was just one of those guys, and we know these people. So there's this mechanism that's out of control, right? And control would be the ability to stop. And he can't. So how does this relate? How does Crazy Tony and this type of communication, this torrent that some people have with their thoughts and speaking, how does it relate to us? Well, like I said, people like that, and if you're not a person like that, you at least understand it. It's not a difference of kind. It's a difference of degree. So we can all relate, and we all have these instances that happen in our life. Now, probably most pertinent for the people listening to me now is if we talk about the subject of controlling what we eat. Because if you think about it, it always starts with a thought, right? Wouldn't it be great right now to have pizza or a piece of cake? You know, that thing that we call a craving kind of starts out with a thought, and it might be triggered by our bodies. You know, it might be legitimate hunger, or it just might be a thought. You know, let's fill in the space. We're a little bored right now, or, you know, we're watching TV, and, you know, it's great to have something tasty and while we're watching TV. The problem is the inability to control that thought, because it then starts to repeat itself. And if we try to resist it, it can really intensify. And it often does that to the point where we just give in. Or if we've experienced this a lot, we don't resist it in the first place. And this is the mechanism of being out of control. We all know what it's like to be out of control. We could all tell stories of eating in a way that's out of control, that's nonstop, that's, you know, beyond our volition, it seems. So what would be the solution? Probably depends who you ask. If you ask a Buddhist, you know, they talk about desires. And they talk about how desires can ultimately lead to suffering. And so the key is then to detach ourselves from our desires. And that sounds very reasonable, right? What happens is we not only have the thought, and the thought keeps kind of poking at us, but we attach ourselves to it in some way, right? If we could just have the thought and not have it affect us in any way, it would just be like, you know, goldfish swimming through a pond. It wouldn't have the same effect on us. And these cravings do have an effect on us, because whether or not they start out as a physiological thing, as a body thing, you know, generally what happens is we have some kind of a physical symptom about it. You know, we have some somatic reaction, right? Somatic meaning like of the body. And that might be, you know, we start to salivate. Maybe our heart starts to beat a little faster. You know, maybe we feel a pang in our gut. And is there such a thing as hunger? Of course there is. But most people know at some level that, you know, hunger merely as a physiological thing without all the other stuff involved comes and goes and gets satisfied, and it's not to the degree that sends us out of control. You know, generally babies, if you give them food, they'll eat until they're satiated, and then they won't look at it anymore. And of course, you know, then moms will force it down their throat. Generally moms, right? It could be fathers, it could be grandmothers, but, you know, that outside in kind of an impulse can fester and grow within that baby as he becomes a child and an adult. So the Buddhists have that one strategy, that detachment strategy. And like I said, that seems pretty right. It doesn't mean it's the only one or the best one. I wish I could tell you right now which is the only one or the best one. I can't. I believe resistance, you know, just pure force of will resistance might not be the best strategy. Because then it becomes a matter of force, right? Generally, when you try to suppress an urge, it just keeps popping back up, which is why the strategy of detaching from it makes more sense, right? We could also reframe it. You know, oh, that's just my mind and my body, and, you know, no big deal, and it'll go away, and, you know, that's that. We can kind of strategize around it by using that impulse, but eating something better and healthier. and something that's going to nourish and energize us. Don't forget, these thoughts and cravings are more likely to take hold in a body that's exhausted. So you do want to nourish yourself. It can be just viewed and framed as feedback. This is my body telling me to nourish myself now. Great. Okay, good. Pass me the carrots. Right? That's the ideal scenario. Sometimes that's not as satisfying, though, as the sugar. There is a habit and momentum aspect as well. When people go and binge eat, there is a momentum built up that can be hard to reverse. And so that gets into more of an energetic thing, probably. Okay? So this is one of those situations where I don't have an absolute answer. I'm trying to kind of lay out the groundwork, the map of it, which is that we have thoughts that we generate. And we don't only always generate them as a matter of choice. We just kind of do habitually. Some of us do this more than others. Some of us can be more selective with these thoughts and allow some of them to allow the thoughts to take root, the ones we want, and the other ones, just fade away. I think it's demonstrably true, though, that if we can't control our thoughts and thus our actions, we can be put into a bad way. Okay, and again, if we're going to pathologize it, we can refer to those things as OCD or ADD or whatever you want to, call it. And there are medications for those things, but I am not convinced those are necessarily diseases as such. I'm not convinced that those are things that attack us from the outside, like physical diseases. It may be, right? It may be about the wiring. I don't know, but because I don't know, I'm not going to declare absolutely one way or the other. It may be thinking, because we can exert more control than we do generally. Even if it's just 1%. It's generally not completely beyond our control unless we give ourselves over to it. Unless we say, I cannot fight it. And those are states that do happen. We get into those states. I can't fight it. I'm not even going to try. I'm going to indulge it. So I would invite everyone to think about how this process kind of goes on for them, for you in your lives, and what the best strategy for you might be. And that's it. That's your assignment for this week. Other than enjoying yourself and enjoying summer, that is your assignment. Let me remind you, as always, I am here to help in these ways, right? I offer certain tools and guidance. Our programs are obviously extremely powerful. Statistically, the results are better than the shots and don't come with the same side effects. So I would invite you to take advantage of what we offer. Our programs are a physiological handling, but we do talk about the emotional and energetic components as well. Because people are not just their bodies, they're not just their chemistry. But it would behoove us to improve the chemistry, the physiology, and the emotion and the energy and the thoughts. They all kind of interact with each other in ways that none of us fully understand, but in ways that can be intervened with. And that's what we do here. And we do it in a very powerful and very effective way. I will not be shy or humble about it. I'm good at this. I've been doing this for a while. So if you need help, do not hesitate. reach out and we could have a conversation. And just as I said, it all starts out with a thought. Most change starts out with a thought as well, right? It starts out with a declaration of what you want. But if you've come to the conclusion that you need assistance, which is a good idea for a lot of reasons that we've talked about in the past, we'll probably talk about in the future. If you've come to that conclusion, then it starts with a conversation. Conversations clarify. Conversations can be motivational. They can open up possibilities that we have forgotten about, ways of being in the world and ways of living and approaching our life and our health and our relationship to our body that, we forgot were even possibilities. So that might sound a little weird for some of you. For some of you, that resonates really perfectly. But I would invite you to reach out and we can have a conversation. All right? Enough about that. Have a fantastic week. It's a short week. And enjoy summer.